Only minutes earlier, 14 people had gathered on the 7th floor of Vance Prestige Group headquarters in Scottsdale, Arizona. 11 of them looked at the man in faded work boots and worn jeans as if he didn't belong in the room. By the time the meeting ended, every one of them would remember his name. Ryan Cole sat with a single manila folder in front of him, no briefcase, no suit. He wore a gray Henley that had been washed enough times to lose its shape, dark jeans and work boots that carried a permanent waterline of dried degreaser along the soles. He had arrived 43 minutes early, parked his 2009 F-150 between two black company Escalades in the visitor lot, and spent 37 of those minutes sitting in the cab. He hadn't been nervous. He'd been on the phone with Lily. She was 6 years old, missing her front left incisor, and conducting a controlled experiment regarding Tooth Fairy payment schedules. Her hypothesis, based on data provided by her friend Maya, was that longer holding times produced higher payouts. Ryan had not corrected her. She was running the experiment with the same focused precision she applied to everything else. The nightly arrangement of her stuffed rabbit patch on the pillow beside her, the tracking of which socks were lucky. The ones with star patterns, worn on Mondays only, the increasingly detailed architectural drawings she made of his shop. That morning, before he'd driven her to Saguaro Elementary, she'd held Patch up toward his face. A gray lop-eared rabbit with one ear resewn and one eye missing since an incident involving the ceiling fan that she described as an accident and Ryan suspected was not, and made the rabbit wave one ratty arm. "Patch says you already know all the answers," she'd told him. "You just have to say them out loud." "Is that what Patch says?" "He says it every time you look nervous." Ryan had not realized he looked nervous. He'd kissed her forehead, driven her to school, and told her he'd text when it was done. Now he sat at the far end of a conference table that could seat 20, looking across 42 pages of technical defense that Jason Mercer, service director of Vance Prestige's flagship location, had arranged into binders on his side of the room. Two attorneys sat flanking Mercer. Isabella Vance, CEO and granddaughter of the company's founder, occupied the head of the table in a charcoal blazer, her hands flat on the surface. Margaret Holloway, whose 8 Bentley Bentaygas currently sat in Ryan's small shop on East Thomas Road, sat to his left with a slimmer folder and the expression of a woman who had learned over 30 years of capital management, when a room was already decided and when it wasn't. This room, she'd told him in the parking lot an hour ago, was not yet decided. Isabella Vance opened the meeting at 9:07 a.m., and she summarized the situation the way she seemed to do everything, precisely, without editorializing. 8 vehicles, a $200,000 repair quote, a counter-assessment suggesting the actual repair cost was under $200. She asked Ryan to present his findings. Ryan opened his folder. He removed 3 sheets of paper and set them face down on the table. "I'd like to start," he said, "with an email from March 2022. The room went still. To understand why, you have to go back further. Not to the conference room, not to Margaret Holloway's phone call. To a Tuesday morning in 2022 when Ryan Cole wrote 4 paragraphs that he was told, in 9 words, to bury, and then spent the next 2 years being proven right about every single sentence. Ryan had been the best diagnostic technician Vance Prestige employed during his 6 years there. He would not have told you this. You would have had to ask his former colleagues, or pull the internal service metrics, or talk to the Porsche owner in Mesa whose car had been misdiagnosed by 3 other shops before it ended up in Ryan's Bay. He'd traced that one to a cracked injector O-ring invisible on any scanner but announced by a specific irregularity in the fuel trim data at 2400 RPM, which he'd found by measuring rather than assuming. He'd learned to read cars the way some people read faces, not just the codes the scanner produced, but the patterns beneath the codes. The relationship between temperature cycles and failure windows. The difference between what a system reported and what was actually wrong. He'd spent 15 years with European vehicles, Bentley, Porsche, McLaren, and he'd arrived at a simple conviction. The most expensive answer was almost never the right one, because expensive answers were usually constructed around incomplete questions. His daughter had been 3 when his wife died. A highway interchange north of Phoenix, a rainstorm, a semi that crossed lanes. Ryan had taken a week off and gone back to work because work was one of the two things he understood how to do well, and the other one was being Lily's father. He'd brought Patch to the hospital the week Lily was born. It wasn't a purchase thing. It had been sitting on a shelf in a second-hand shop on Camelback Road, one ear slightly misaligned from a previous repair, and something about it had seemed right. Lily had named it before she could say her own name clearly. By the time she was 4, Patch had survived a washing machine incident requiring ear reconstruction and had lost an eye to what Lily described as a ceiling fan accident, and Ryan suspected was a deliberate and unreported experiment. He'd been at Vance Prestige for 6 years when he found Technical Service Bulletin 22 EMB 047. Bentley issued internal TSBs to dealer networks when they identified field problems that required attention. Most were procedural, calibration adjustments, software revisions. TSB 22 EMB 047 was different. It identified a specific auxiliary fuse in the Bentaygas Power Distribution Center, the F47, as prone to resistance drift under repeated thermal cycling. The fuse used a bismuth alloy element that, when exposed to repeated heating and cooling through normal engine operation, would gradually increase in electrical resistance without failing. It would not blow, it would not trigger a warning, it would simply get worse, invisibly, until it was dropping enough voltage to starve the ADAS gateway module below its minimum operating threshold. Below that threshold, the gateway did not merely malfunction, it dropped every downstream system it controlled in a cascade. Lane departure warning, automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, rear cross-traffic alert. 14 fault codes in under 4 minutes. The fix was the fuse. $14. Ryan cross-referenced the bulletin against Vance Prestige's client fleet and identified 6 vehicles matching the failure profile. He wrote a 4-paragraph report for Jason Mercer. He outlined the bulletin, identified the at-risk vehicles, and recommended a proactive inspection program. Mercer's reply arrived 3 days later, 9 words. Does not apply to our current vehicles, do not forward. Ryan read the email twice. Then he printed it along with his own original message. He put both pages in a red accordion folder and placed the folder in his filing cabinet at home, because he had been in the industry long enough to understand that the things management refused to forward were usually the things you'd want forwarded later. 10 weeks after the email, HR informed him that his position was being eliminated due to organizational restructuring and a misalignment of professional values. His badge was deactivated at 4:30 p.m. on a Thursday. He cleaned out his locker, drove to Lily's after-school program, and took her out for pizza. "Are you home early because of something good?" she asked. "I'm working somewhere different now." She considered this. "Does the new place have good snacks?" "The snacks are okay. Patch thinks it'll be better," she said. He'd opened his own shop 8 months later on East Thomas Road, 2 lifts, 1 alignment rack. A parts room that doubled as his assistant Lucas's lunch spot. It covered rent and allowed him to be in the school pickup line at 3:15 every afternoon, which was the one non-negotiable of his life. He hadn't thought much about Vance Prestige. He'd thought about the F47 fuse sometimes, when a vehicle came through with a familiar fault pattern. He'd fixed 3 of them on his own. He'd wondered how many he wasn't seeing. Then Margaret Holloway called. She was efficient on the phone. No preamble. She described the situation in the sequence it had occurred and waited for his response. 8 Bentaygas. Identical ADAS fault code clusters across all vehicles. Recent service by Vance Prestige. A $200,000 repair quote for module replacement. Ryan listened without interrupting. When she mentioned that the faults appeared after extended operation rather than at cold start, something organized itself clearly in his mind. F47, he said. "I'm sorry?" "Auxiliary fuse. Resistance drift under thermal load. Your vehicles develop the fault after the engine's been running. That's the signature. Have your drivers noticed the codes appearing specifically after 20 minutes or more of operation?" She conferenced in her fleet manager. He confirmed it. 20 to 25 minutes, every time. "I've been looking for 8 of these for 2 years, Ryan said. "Bring them in." The vehicles arrived over 2 days. Lucas, Ryan's 24-year-old assistant, photographed each on intake. It was a habit Ryan had picked up from Ernst, a German-trained technician who had set up shop in Tempe in the 90s after 30 years at a factory. Ernst had told Ryan on his first day, "The machine tells you everything it knows before you touch it. Learn to listen before you speak to it." Ryan placed his palm flat on the hood of the first Bentayga. He closed his eyes and held it there for 4 seconds. The residual heat distributed evenly across the left panel, slightly cooler toward the center. Consistent with recent operation, engine recently stopped. He nodded once, then he connected the scanner. The screen populated with 14 fault codes. Lucas read through them, voice dropping lower with each one. Lane departure warning. Automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, rear cross-traffic alert, the entire ADAS suite, tripping simultaneously. Mercer's team was probably right about the module, Lucas said. If the entire suite is down, what's the voltage at pin 14C of the ADAS gateway? Lucas looked up. We haven't measured that. Measure it. This is where most technicians stop. A scanner shows 14 codes pointing toward a module. The module is replaced. It is a reasonable approach. Fault codes exist to direct the process, and following codes is usually efficient. But fault codes describe symptoms, not causes. A code reading ADAS gateway communication fault means the module is failing to communicate. It does not mean the module itself has failed. It means something upstream is failing to give the module what it needs. The distinction costs $14 or $24,000, depending on which question you ask first. Ryan had learned to ask the upstream question first. He'd learned it by being wrong once, on a Porsche Panamera, whose infotainment system he'd replaced at significant cost, before discovering the actual cause was a cracked solder joint on a secondary relay board 60 centimeters away. A $9 component. He had not made the same mistake a second time. He waited while Lucas set up the voltage measurement. 13.4 at idle, Lucas called. Run it to operating temperature. They waited. At the 23-minute mark, the first fault code appeared on the dashboard. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Checking pin 14C. Lucas's voice when he gave the number was careful. 12.1, Ryan nodded. The ADAS gateway module in a Bentley Bentayga was engineered to operate within a tight voltage band. Minimum threshold 13.1 volts. Below that, the module's processor began dropping peripheral systems to protect its own core function, one by one, then all at once. 14 systems, 14 codes, under 4 minutes. But the module was receiving 12.1 volts. The module was not broken. Something between the battery and pin 14C was losing 3 volts. Ryan traced the circuit backward through the power distribution center, measuring at each junction. Battery terminal, main fuse block, secondary distribution bus, then the auxiliary feeds. He measured fuse F47, at ambient temperature 04 ohms resistance. He ran the engine to temperature again. He measured while the fault codes were active. At operating temperature 31 ohms. 7 times the resistance. At 11 amps of draw through the ADAS circuit, 31 ohms produced a 3-4 volt drop. Combined with other small losses through the circuit, the gateway was receiving 12.1 volts instead of 13.8. It had been happening every time the engine got warm, every single drive for months. Ryan held the fuse under the shop light, a small cylindrical thing, silver inert, bismuth alloy element, standard fitment. $14 in the parts catalog. He replaced it. He ran the engine to operating temperature. Check pin 14C, 14.2 volts. He cleared the fault codes. He ran the complete ADAS diagnostic suite. The screen came back clean. He ran it again. Clean. He drove the vehicle around his block 3 times, pushed it through 2 full heat cycles, brought it back, and ran the diagnostic a 3rd time. Clean. Lucas stood in the bay doorway. He'd watched the entire sequence. He had the expression of someone who has just understood something that seems impossibly simple and is trying to decide if simplicity makes it more or less significant. All 8 have the same fuse, he said. All 8 were serviced by Vance Prestige in the same 2-week window, Ryan said. That service included an electrical inspection and a fault code reset. The reset cleared the existing symptoms. 6 weeks later, the thermal cycling catches back up and the codes return. Lucas processed this slowly. So Vance Prestige reset the symptoms without treating the cause. And when the cars came back with the same problem, Mercer quotes module replacement. But he knew about the fuse, Lucas said. You told him. Ryan set the old fuse down on the workbench. He looked at it for a moment. He knew, Ryan said. He picked up his phone and called Margaret Holloway. He sent the 12-page diagnostic report before she had processed what he'd told her. It included voltage logs from 2 vehicles, timestamp correlations between fault code appearances and engine temperature data, the full text of TSB 22EMB047, and a parts receipt for 8 F-47 fuses totaling $96. Total repair cost, including diagnostic time and labor, $180 versus $200,000. Vance Prestige's legal team responded within 48 hours. Precise and aggressive. Ryan Cole held no current Bentley factory certification. The repair had been performed outside the authorized dealer network. The collective manufacturer warranty, valued at over $1. $4 million, may have been voided. The letter urged Margaret to consider her exposure carefully. Jason Mercer issued a separate statement questioning Ryan's methodology. Ryan read both documents at his kitchen table at 11 p.m., Lily asleep down the hall. Patch was sitting at the corner of the table where Lily had left him after homework. Ryan found himself explaining the situation to the rabbit, which he did occasionally, not from superstition, but because articulating things to an audience that couldn't argue back helped him think precisely. He pre-ordered the modules, he said. He had to. You don't write a parts order that specific before the vehicles are diagnosed. He had the order in before they ran a single measurement. Patch did not confirm this. Ryan went to his filing cabinet. The red accordion folder from 2022. His email from March 14, Mercer's reply from March 17, 9 words. He read them under the kitchen light, his own handwriting in the margin from 2 years ago in pencil. Keep this. He made a copy. He called Lucas. Lucas found the warranty portal records by noon the next day. Any warranty claim filed by a dealership with the manufacturer was logged in a database accessible to authorized service providers, which Ryan still was, through his own shop credentials. He searched for Vance Prestige claims involving ADAS module replacement over the previous 30 months. He found 43 cases in the first search, with a more refined query 47. 47 vehicles, an average repair cost of $23,600, everyone presenting with an identical fault profile, everyone diagnosed with module failure. Not a single record of F-47 fuse inspection or replacement. Ryan called Bentley's North American technical support line and asked to speak with the Western Region engineering specialist. The specialist's name was David Park. He had 19 years with the company. When Ryan described the fault pattern and the thermal resistance drift in the F-47, Park said, "That's the bulletin we distributed in March 2022. We flagged that for the full dealer network." Ryan asked whether fuse replacement per that bulletin constituted a manufacturer-approved repair. Yes. Whether such a repair would affect warranty provisions. No. "I'd like that in writing," Ryan said. "I'll send it today," Park said. The letter arrived by email at 7:43 the morning of the conference. Ryan was making Lily's lunch. The phone buzzed on the counter. He read the email standing, then read it again. He printed it at the kitchen printer and put it in the manila folder with the voltage logs and Mercer's 9-word reply. Lily was at the table with her good markers, the ones reserved for important occasions. She'd been working since 6. "Are you ready?" she asked, without looking up. "Getting there. Patch thinks you should wear the blue shirt." "I'm wearing this one." She looked up. She evaluated the gray Henley with the expression of a person who found it exactly tolerable. "It's fine. It looks like you do real work. That's the goal." She turned the drawing around so he could see it. A low building with 3 garage doors, a sign over the entrance he couldn't quite read from across the table. In front of the building, a small figure in a gray shirt leaning under a car hood. On a workbench beside the building watching, a gray rabbit with one stitched ear. At the bottom, in her careful block letters, "Sometimes the small peas is the most important." Ryan stood still for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. "That's good, Lily." "I know," she said, and went back to coloring. He folded the drawing and put it in the inside pocket of the jacket he only wore to meetings. Then he drove her to school, talked through the Tooth Fairy economics, and told her he'd text when it was done. "Patch says you'll be fine," she said, opening the truck door. "Tell Patch thank you." She ran toward the building without turning around. Back in the conference room, Ryan turned the 3 sheets of paper over, one at a time. The Bentley letter first. He centered it on the table and let the room read it. One of Mercer's attorneys leaned forward. Isabella Vance read it twice, the second pass slower than the first. The voltage log second. The graph required no explanation, a clean correlation between rising engine temperature and voltage drop at pin 14C. Fault code timestamps marked at the precise moment the voltage crossed below 13. 23 minutes, every vehicle, every test run. The email third. He turned it over and left it in the center of the table. Mercer's 9-word reply sat at the top of the page, Ryan's 4 paragraphs beneath it, date stamped March 14, 2022. 18 months before Margaret Holloway's fleet ever appeared at Vance Prestige for service. The second attorney quietly closed his binder. Mercer said, "That email is out of context." No one responded. Isabella Vance said, to no one in particular, "When were the replacement modules ordered, relative to the intake date of Mrs. Holloway's fleet?" Mercer said, "Parts ordering is a standard inventory. I'm asking for the date," Isabella said. One of his attorneys put a hand on his arm. Isabella stood. "This meeting is in recess." She didn't look at Ryan. She didn't look at Mercer. She walked out of the conference room and pulled the door shut behind her, carefully, quietly, with a precision that carried more weight than if she'd slammed it. Ryan gathered his folder. He recapped his pen. He looked across at Jason Mercer, who sat very still with his binders and his 42 pages and his 9 words. There was nothing to say to him. He'd said it in 2022. Ryan left the room. The internal investigation took 11 weeks. What it found: Jason Mercer had placed a purchase order for 8 ADAS control modules on the same day Margaret Holloway's vehicles were checked in for intake. Not after diagnostics, not after fault codes were pulled. The same day. The vehicles had been in the intake bay fewer than 40 minutes when the parts order was submitted. What it also found: in the 30 months since Mercer had killed Ryan's warning, Vance Prestige had performed module replacements on 47 vehicles presenting identical symptoms. 47 owners who had paid an average of $2,300 for a repair that required, in each case, a fuse replacement and circuit calibration, between $80 and $150 in parts. The labor difference between the correct repair and the unnecessary one was 9 hours. Mercer was placed on administrative leave on a Wednesday and escorted from the building with a banker's box. He did not speak to anyone on the way out. Isabella Vance spent the 3 days after his suspension reading through case records herself, not delegating, reading. On the 4th day, she called Margaret. On the 5th day, she drove to East Thomas Road and parked between a Range Rover on the left lift and a Porsche 911 with its front suspension disassembled. She wore jeans and a fleece vest. When Ryan came out from under the Porsche, she held out her hand. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. "I owe you the conversation Jason buried in 2022, if you're willing." Ryan wiped his hands on a shop rag. He studied her face for a moment. She didn't look away. "Do you want coffee?" he said. "Lucas makes it bad on purpose. He thinks it's a joke." She almost smiled. "I'll risk it." They sat in his office, metal desk, 2 chairs of non-matching origin, a whiteboard dense with circuit notations, and Ryan spoke for 40 minutes. She asked clean questions. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she said, "Will you consult on the remediation? We need someone who can assess each case independently." Ryan said he'd think about it. She left. He went back to the Porsche. Lucas emerged from underneath the Range Rover approximately 4 minutes later. "So," he said, "she's genuine. Is that a yes?" I said I'd think about it. He thought for 2 days. He thought about the 47 vehicles. He thought about Lily's drawing still in his jacket pocket. He thought about the difference between being right and being useful. He called Isabella and said yes, his rate, his schedule. The remediation program ran for 6 weeks. Ryan assessed 12 cases personally. He found the same F-47 failure in 11. The 12th had a genuine module fault, a separate root cause unrelated to the fuse issue, and he documented that one with equal care, because the point was not to vindicate Ryan Cole. The point was to get the diagnosis right. All 47 customers were contacted. Vance Prestige performed the correct repair at no charge, refunded warranty claims, and covered all related expenses. Isabella's public statement, when it came, was direct. It named the failure clearly. named the correction, and named the standard she intended to maintain. It did not name Ryan, he hadn't asked it to. Margaret Holloway's 8 Bentaygas were completed on a Friday afternoon. Total parts cost $112. She sent Ryan a check for 4 times his quoted consulting rate and a handwritten note that said, "Trust the man who shows you the work, not the man who shows you the invoice." He read it twice, then taped it to the whiteboard, above the circuit diagrams. The formal offer to return to Vance Prestige arrived in week 6. Senior Technical Director, a salary 3 times what his shop currently generated. He read the letter twice. He put it in the envelope. He took 2 days. Then he wrote back and declined. He told Isabella she had what she needed to do it right, and he meant it. He told her if she ever had a car harder to diagnose than it should be, she had his number. He drove the reply to the post office himself. Some things he didn't trust to email. 6 months later, Automated Precision Diagnostics on East Thomas Road had a second lift and a used alignment rack. Lucas had brought on an apprentice named Sonder, 22, who'd been turned down by 3 dealerships for asking too many root cause questions and not enough throughput questions. Ryan had offered him the job in the middle of a diagnostic demonstration. Sonder hadn't asked about the salary. He'd asked what the voltage was at pin 14C. Ryan had said, "You're hired." On the morning the second lift was installed, Lily made a new drawing. A bigger building this time, 3 doors, 4 figures, one in a gray shirt by the hood, 3 others with tools, all at different angles. And on the workbench in the corner, as always, Patch. Gray rabbit, 1 ear stitched, 1 eye bright and 1 gone, watching the work with what Lily had drawn as a very small and very certain smile. At the bottom of the page, in letters more accurate than before, "Sometimes the smallest piece is the most important." Spelled right this time. Ryan folded the drawing and slid it into his shirt pocket. He'd frame it that evening in the kitchen, after Lily was asleep, and hang it beside the first one above the whiteboard. It would live there with the note from Margaret and the circuit diagrams, and the things he was still learning to say out loud. He walked into the shop. He rested his palm flat on the hood of the first car in the queue. He closed his eyes. He held it there for 4 seconds. He listened. Then he began. "I keep coming back to that 9-word reply. Does not apply to our current vehicles. Do not forward. 9 words to end a conversation. 9 words to bury a $14 solution for 2.5 years. What stays with me isn't the deliberateness, though that's damning enough. It's how ordinary it looks. Bureaucratic, managerial. The kind of reply that sounds like process management and functions as permission to do nothing." Ryan kept the paper copy. That detail matters to me more than almost anything else in this story. In an industry where digital records have a way of disappearing when convenient, he printed the email and put it in a red accordion folder because he trusted paper more than servers. That's not luck. That's someone who understood early that truth needs a caretaker. Here's the question I'd ask you. Have you ever spotted something wrong in a system, a process, a place you worked, and reported it only to be told it didn't apply? What did you do with that? Did you let it go? Or did you keep the paper copy? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is entirely coincidental. This story is intended for entertainment and personal reflection. If this story hits something real, share it with someone who works with their hands. A mechanic, an engineer, a technician. Someone who knows the difference between reading a code and finding the cause. They'll recognize exactly what Ryan was doing in that bay. If you're not subscribed yet, hit the button below. New stories like this every week. Quiet people, real expertise, and the moments when both finally get seen.